Stop trying to save your soul, okay, and make yourself feel good by sending a bunch of bloody tents to Gaza. If you really cared about the people in Gaza, you would be on your case like a bad rash, getting that prime minister of ours to use the word genocide. For the love of God and for the love of your own life, don't defer living until you're retired. Don't defer living until you're retired. Live today. Okay, that doesn't mean ignore the future. What it does mean is that you free yourself from this rat race. Being employed in this country is a very, very bad idea, I think. I genuinely think if you're employed in this country, you are living an enslaved, a quasi-slaved existence ourselves. Why is it so damn hard for us to fire at any tier of government bad talent? Why is that the case? Why are their pension plans the most generous on this planet? Like literally on this planet.
It's great to have you here. Welcome to the Nabil Show.
The Nabil Show.
We've been warming up for a little while here now, but
Yes.
Glad to have you here, and it's quite a pleasure of mine. So it's good to have you. I've read a lot about you, and
Are we live right now?
we are recording.
Oh my goodness.
We'll
We're
edit it
on
a
the
little
record.
bit. We'll edit it a little bit, make sure it's all cleaned out. We'll put it on YouTube in a week or so.
Okay.
That's about it.
So,
But I've definitely read a lot about you. Been following you for a while on social, especially LinkedIn, and then also on X. I know you are quite active, but I know you have a lot going on, and you have quite a following on social media and the real world too. But please introduce yourself.
oh my goodness. My name's Saqib Qureshi. I enjoy peanut butter, and I have to have a couple of pieces of licorice every day. The real stuff, that is. And beyond that, I mean, I think I'm incredibly blessed to have been the beneficiary of phenomenal amounts of sacrifice and love, not only by my parents, but an army of people over the course of my 50 years. And I stand very much at their mercy because they really have, at different points, different people have made me a better person and have enabled me to figure out what I'm doing wrong and what I could be doing better, and encouraged me and inspired me and motivated me. And yeah, that's pretty much who I am.
Awesome. So, like you mentioned, given your kind of wider impact and success in entrepreneurship in various fields, I kind of want to get started by asking you about how you were raised and kind of your education background.
So, born in London and lived all of my life, my early life in Northwest London. I went to one of the top private schools in Northwest London for 11 years. Very, very lucky. Again, by virtue of parents more than anything else, they broke their necks for me, and I was able to get into this school and did really well at the school. And my first job in investment banking after that, my first move out of school was to university at the LSE, and then investment banking for 4 years before doing a PhD. So that's kind of my formal education. My parents gave both myself and my siblings an awful lot of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I do worry about children in the modern era who have parachute parents sitting on their heads, organizing each and every second of their lives. We did not have that. My parents pretty much left it up to us to go out and figure out what we want to do, and just do it well. My father dropped me at university in my first day in 1992. And says to me in his Pakistani accent, I still remember the car journey, he says, "Beta, I'm so proud of you." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "That you are studying economics at the London School of Economics." And I said, "Dad, I'm not studying economics there." He said, "What?" I said, "I'm not studying economics there." He said, "What are you studying there?" I said, "I'm studying international relations." He said, "Really?" I was like, so that kind of summed up the level of kind of oversight that my parents had. It was like, we're just going to let them do well. We're going to remind them that they've got to do well, and they will figure out what they do well at.
Awesome. But I think you chose like economics and political science kind of as a field. Is that, at least in the degree name, I don't know if that's accurate.
It's a bit misleading, isn't it? So my undergraduate degree is fundamentally international relations,
Mm-hmm.
which in North America means politics, but in Europe, international relations is a much deeper dive into the humanities.
I see.
And social sciences. So it goes into economics, but also goes into semiotics, into philosophy, into ontology, into culture, into anthropology, into history. So it's a much deeper dive in a broader spectrum of subjects, I think. And so I do have some economics understanding. I did it at A-level when I was 17, 18. Yeah, it's not my forte.
I see. So was there a specific political or economic climate at the time that made you choose, that field?
Yeah. So I entered university hot on the heels of the Gulf War, of the first Gulf War.
Okay.
And I actually went in with a very specific question in mind to my undergraduate degree, which was, is there a conspiracy against the Muslim world by the West? I mean, aged 17, 18, that is the centerpiece question that I went into university asking myself. So the first Bush-Thatcher Gulf War against Saddam was the context. And I was very lucky at the LSE to connect with one of the senior professors, a guy called Fred Halliday, professor of international relations, focused on the Middle East, had huge stature, and he brought me under his wings, and I would sit outside. I mean, he didn't interface with any undergraduate students, but I would sit outside of his room, wait for him to come in and say, Fred, I've got a few more questions for you. And I'd kind of learn by asking him and challenging him and arguing with him, and it was a fantastic learning curve for me.
Awesome. So the following 10 years after that, we had 9/11. So was your question answered, your curiosity going into university, and then how did that change with 9/11?
So what I realized is, in essence, I think number one, I realized that there's no such thing as Islam as a monolithic religion or ideology. Like the spectrum of what has been categorized as Islam over the last 1400 years has been so wide and so massive that it's almost as broad as saying Christianity. Like, what on earth is Christianity? It's such a massively diverse religion. So that was the one thing that I picked up quite quickly. The second thing that I picked up was this kind of notion of a Western conspiracy to destroy Islam and Muslims was just wrong. There's a difference between having prejudice against a people and having, mild Islamophobia at the time or during previous centuries. There's a difference between all of that and saying that the West wants to destroy Muslim people and Islam. And so that nuance was important because what it meant was that it enabled me to gel very nicely, actually, my Western and Muslim identities. I've never really felt conflicted about my being a part of the West and my being Muslim. And 9/11 was one of those moments that, for those of us who experienced them as young adults or as adults, where the years since that have been very difficult. I don't really think of 9/11 as being cause and effect of a conspiracy against the Muslim world, but I also do think that it did enable, like we all know, an awful lot of prejudice and hostility against Muslim people, against our faith, against supposedly who we are. It's been particularly from the United States and Fox News and a bunch of right-wing Zionist lobby groups who have kind of used it very nicely for their political objectives.
So dwelling on that a little bit, I know you said, you realized that Islam was not one kind of monolithic religion and a huge array of cultures, languages, people, beliefs, or even sub-beliefs within Islam, all within kind of the umbrella of Islam. But I think there's also a normative Islam, kind of the mainstream normative Islam, and certainly from outside of Islam, most people will look at the Muslim world as kind of one thing. And, they all kind of believe in the Quran, the Hadith, and this is what they follow. So at least from within our own perspective, we can realize that there are, various practices and cultures around the world and how they implement Islam. But from the outside and from the American or from the Western European perspective, Islam is one monolithic, community. Is that true?
Yeah, which is not surprising, because I think for most Muslims, we don't appreciate the diversity, let's say, of in Judaism or in Hinduism or in Sikhism, and so we shouldn't expect non-Muslims to appreciate the diversity in our own community. And I also think beyond that we sometimes don't appreciate the diversity in our own community. Rumi, for instance, was for centuries one of the most important Islamic thinkers. Today, he's important because he's a fancy poet whose quotes do really well on Facebook. But to the best of my knowledge, he is not used as a reference point in conversations around the dinner table about Islam. Whereas, like I say, there was a time for many centuries where he was a centerpiece conversation about what it means to be Muslim. And so, yes, we have an awful lot of diversity in our community and in the past, and we don't realize it. And to expect people who are barely literate about Islam to appreciate the subtleties and nuances is, is just asking too much. Because, like I say, how many Muslims know an awful lot about the diversity in Judaism?
For sure. So, how does that change things in politically, in terms of we aren't monolithic, but everybody perceives us to be monolithic? What do we do about that?
I think we have to face up to the reality that we are perceived of as being a lunatic, violent, terrorist faith.
We are perceived quite a bit.
Yeah, we have to just face up to that and say, look, this is a reality that we are up against. How do you navigate that? How do you challenge that? What do you have to do? And I mean, we've touched upon this before the interview began, but the second half of my book, Being Muslim Today, it really focuses on turning the tables, because part of my mission statement there was to point out to the people who are accusing Muslims and accusing Islam of being violent, point out to them, historically and theologically, Muslims have been way less violent than those who are accusing us. Our holy book doesn't talk about genocide of other people. It doesn't talk about killing babies. And our track record on genocide, for instance, is, I wouldn't say one book to brag about. There have been at least a couple of instances of genocide that I can think of. The Turkish one in Armenia, for instance, is one, perhaps the biggest. But none of the great genocides in human history have Muslim fingerprints to them. I mean, let's not run away from the reality that the Nazi genocide, which killed 15, 20 odd million people, has Protestant Christian fingerprints all over it. The German Protestant Church was an active participant in the Nazi strategy. It wasn't like indifferent. It wasn't like we're against what these guys are doing. No.
So beyond just targeting Jews, beyond
across
that.
the board. I mean, the number of Jewish people that were killed were obviously very extraordinarily high, but there weren't just Jews who were killed as part of the Nazi genocide. But what I'm saying is that how absurd is it that we are accused of being a violent community with a violent religion, but historically and theologically, at both levels, we have proven to be less violent. And not only that, in the current world, homicide per capita in Muslim majority countries is lower than in non-Muslim majority countries. Homicide per capita in Muslim majority countries is lower than non-Muslim majority countries. The highest rates of homicide in the world are in Catholic countries. But, well, we're going to call the Muslims the lunatics and the violent ones. How is that? How? So I want Muslims to actually understand that and say, dude, the next time somebody kind of remotely links you with violence as a culture or a religious identity, go to task. Have a really enjoy it. Like, just point out to them with a battery of hard stats and facts and say, what were you drinking just a few moments ago, mate?
Well, I agree with you. However, many will push back and say, in the Muslim world, you'll have despotic regimes. You don't have any freedom. You don't have democracy. And especially in the Middle East and, North Africa, you have years of just civil conflict. People just killing each other. You're looking at Syria. You're looking at Afghanistan. You're looking at outside of the rich Arab oil-rich countries, Yemen. You're looking at Iraq, Lebanon. and obviously what's happening in Gaza, Palestine, well, that's a little bit different. Egypt, what happened, and Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, and all of these countries, and they're like, you just at each other's throats, and there's no such thing as peace. And recently Jordan Peterson, I don't know what you think about him, but he was on Piers Morgan, and he was basically saying that the most of the Muslim world, I think 47 out of 50 countries, something like that, he mentioned, are undemocratic, despotic regimes, and the 3 that are sort of democratic, they're barely functioning. So what do you have to say about that?
So I don't like this word democracy because I don't really think what we have in Canada is a democracy, for instance. We choose an MP who we have no oversight for or on for 4 or 5 years. They can be playing Xbox non-stop and we couldn't do a thing about it. They don't make any decisions. They can barely buy their own desk and chair. They get told by the Prime Minister's office or the party leader what they say, how they say it, when they say it, and how they vote. That's not much of a democracy. Democracy is people power. We don't have any people power in Canada. We just elect somebody for 4 years who then chooses somebody else because they're told to choose somebody else as Prime Minister who calls all of the shots. So that's a minor point to the answer to the question I think that you're asking. With respect to the Muslim world, the vast majority of the Muslim world was colonized. And we can go into why it was colonized, and a big chunk of that is to do with the military-industrial revolution. There are question marks around the role of freedom of thinking in the Muslim world, which collapsed before the Renaissance took place in Europe. But certainly, this willingness and, to go around calling every second Muslim person an apostate, you are a kafir and all the rest of that, that's probably a contributing factor as well. But let's just accept the reality that the Muslim world was largely colonized. When the colonialists had left, number one, they had already taken out the vast bulk of the wealth. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've got limited resources left, and they left each people with political frameworks and systems which had nothing to do with the indigenous population. Jinnah was appointed as Governor General of Pakistan. Since when was Governor General indigenous to that part of the world? Nehru became Prime Minister. Since when is Prime Minister an Indian thing? I mean, even, so the entire edifice of what was left in place by Western colonial powers was brittle, alien, foreign, didn't work, was never going to work because culturally it's not part of the people. And so we have, as a religious community, suffered extensively for that. I'm not going to blame colonialism alone for the political mess in the Muslim world, but there's no denying that the Muslim world's resources, natural resources, were either plundered or in many cases destroyed by the colonial powers that came to be. And number two, there's no denying that when the colonialists left, they just left us with a rump of a system which was never going to work. And so very, very, very few Muslim countries have sensible working political systems where minorities are accounted for and protected, where change happens sensibly. Very, very, very few of our political systems allow for sensible change, where you can vote people in or vote people out or what have you. And with that, by definition, if that's the case, then political violence has got to happen. You've got to have political violence because the systems don't accommodate for meaningful change and people don't believe in them. Okay, and notwithstanding that, despite that reality of us being vulnerable to political violence as a religious identity, despite that, our homicide per capita is lower than in Muslim majority countries. That to me is a shock. Can you imagine what our murder rates would be like in Muslim majority countries if we had sensible political systems? There'd be a tiny fraction of what they are, let's say, in Canada.
I think there's good examples. If you look at some of the GCC countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, they have almost vanishingly small murder rates per capita.
They do. But they also have political systems. I mean, they have different political systems, but I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're the perfect ones to go after because, you've essentially got dictatorships and monarchies that are in complete control, and have very extensive intelligence systems and all the rest of it. So people just don't want to express dissent, because they'll be in serious trouble if they do.
I think that's the red line in those countries, especially UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and those kind of countries that have oil wealth or energy abundance, and they've been able to generate a lot of wealth for that. It's like you can go as far as questioning the ruling families, and below that you can do a lot of things. And I've seen an opening up of freedoms really over the last maybe 6 years, especially when MBS came into power in Saudi Arabia, and then the changes happening in the UAE. There's a lot of open discussion. People have criticized in the Muslim world UAE's normalization with Israel, for example, but I do see a lot of people in the UAE constantly criticizing Israel's actions, especially since last year, and they haven't been stopped. Previously, you couldn't really say a word, but I think they've kind of allowed some freedom of expression at some point. You can't go as far as start calling out regime change and things like that. And I think rightfully so. I think that could lead to a lot of anarchy. And if you change the ruler, the one that comes next can be far worse. And we've seen many examples of that. So would you say that's fair?
We don't have we don't have sensible mechanisms of political change in the Gulf. We just don't have it. And so that graduated change that you see in most parts of the West, and therefore less violence, less political violence, we just don't have it in the Gulf. Now, the Gulf, I think, is a bit of an odd situation because they've got so much control of their citizen body and their resident body through technology. They are living in information bubbles. Like, there's an awful lot of news that people in the Gulf don't have access to. They just don't get access to it. Sometimes the internet sites are blocked off. Sometimes, the newspapers, the physical copies are removed. The local editor knows exactly the local newspaper editor knows exactly what can and cannot be written. So you've got those information bubbles, but they don't really, they don't feel particularly organic. Like, they don't feel particularly as part of Khaliji Gulf culture. Like if you go back pre-colonial, early 1920s, 30s, and 40s, if you go to an earlier era, those regions are essentially tribes.
Mm-hmm. They're
tribal, without particularly fixed states and boundaries.
It was fairly fluid. They existed, especially for, the recent quite half of the Islamic history under the Ottomans. Previously to that, they were under, the other, Abbasids and Umayyads and stuff like that. But during the Ottoman era, they were all ruling families in specific kind of maybe somewhat fluid boundaries.
Clans and tribes.
Clans and tribes, and and some of the rulers today were rulers back then. The Al Saud family, they had a few moments where lots of periods in history where they ruled. There were some periods where they didn't rule, and also the current ruling families in Qatar and Kuwait and UAE. And so when the British, these became British protectorates after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the British, before they left, they kind of installed these ruling families as permanent kind of rulers in each of these regions, and then they kind of figured out, what their boundaries are. They left with boundaries, but for example, the United Arab Emirates was like 7 different small emirates, and they kind of elected the Nahyan family as kind of their main leader, and then the smaller, the smaller rulers kind of below them, and then they kind of just figured it all out that way, and just been like that ever since.
Yeah, but the Gulf, keep in mind the Gulf population, 40, 50 million people is a tiny percentage of global Muslim population, 1.82 billion. Like it's barely 2%, 2.5%, 3%.
I think their financial, firepower in the last 50 years is what's projected.
Oil.
Massively their power and voice in the Muslim world. The average Indonesian has very little weight compared to the average Emirati or Qatari or Kuwaiti because of GDP per capita. And it's just the reality of things, and that's kind of probably the same thing outside the Muslim world, where an American is much different than an average Moldovan, for example, or something like that, or even the average Russian. It's just, that's what money does.
Well, there's a real concentration of wealth as well in Saudi, for instance. So
there is.
So about 20 people own the country, and they own an awful lot of oil by virtue. And likewise in Abu Dhabi. Like, you talk about the UAE, I mean, really, it's Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
And Abu Dhabi, it's like half a dozen people who own the oil. Well, actually, it's one person, but half a dozen who really control it. So
that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, I want to touch upon kind of early in your career. You were working in television and journalism, starting off your career. So how was working in traditional media kind of shaped your worldview today?
So I did some part-time work at the Financial Times, and I've also produced a TV documentary back in the 90s. Actually, it was the first TV documentary on Muslims in the West, and it was on Muslims in the UK, and it made me appreciate my experience there. Made me appreciate just how tension and conflict centric the media is. Okay, not necessarily exclusively in a military sense, but just it needs to see the tension. It needs to see the conflict. It's not interested in passive. It's not interested.
Well, that's what gets them the sales,
yeah.
Right? So,
but I think it brought it much more steeply to my attention. Like, just working there made me realize just how hungry and sensitive to the conflict, whatever that conflict is, the media is. So that's one piece. And the second thing that made me that I began to see signs of, and I've seen it ever since, is really a bit of a bias in Western media against Muslim identity issues, culture, perception of Muslims. You kind of got the sense that the level of care and understanding given towards a Muslim was always going to be a little bit less, a little bit more flippant than it was going to be towards non-Muslim people. And that's something that surprised me.
Especially Muslims compared to any other kind of
other religious identity.
So what was that? I mean, this is pre 9/11.
Yeah,
mostly.
This is, so even then you could get this sense that a story which vilified Muslims a story that vilified Muslims had a lot more fuel to it than the one that vilified Hindus, Jews, Sikhs, Buddhists. It was just much easier. And since my experience then and conversations with multiple other journalists over the many decades, it's become very apparent that managing and commissioning editors simply are not interested in serious Western journalism. They're simply not interested in showing a Muslim story in a positive light. It's so much easier to talk about Islam and Muslims in a negative light and link them with all sorts of atrocities, even to the extent of fabricating the negative news just to sell newspaper print. And again, this is something that I talk about in my book, which is even in the last few years, heinous examples of supposedly serious, respected Western journalists and newspapers publishing crap. And if the religious identities of the supposed perpetrators had been different, the treatment given to that particular news item would have been completely different.
That's definitely true. So, but what do you think is their real motivation behind that? And it's consistent across many characters. We can see that just even today on X, once it's been purchased by Elon Musk, and there's supposed freedom of speech. Now people are talking about everything. Muslims are getting bashed constantly. Sometimes rightfully so for certain groups. Things, for example, recently it kind of blew up again about the UK grooming gangs, which are mostly Pakistani, nominally Muslim men who perpetuated that, and the numbers seem to be staggering in terms of the involvement of the number of Pakistani Muslims that were involved and the number of British young working class girls that were targeted, and most of them underage. It is very hard to kind of figure out what's happening, because that doesn't seem to have been translated in large pockets of Muslims in Canada and the US and other places. But there seems to be something brewing in the UK, and that's been used by the American right really to just, now Islam is just being thrashed. Now it's being called Islamic rape gangs.
So most grooming gangs in the UK are not Pakistani and they're not Muslim. Okay.
There's a chart that's been floating around X showing that like 80% are Pakistani Muslims and like 20% are white and other non-Islam Muslim groups.
So, I mean, there's stuff on X which is portraying Israel as a victim of events in the last 15 months. So the fact that you have information out there which suggests that most grooming gangs are Pakistani Muslim, that is in the UK context, is just not true. Like, number one, and number two, to the point of why Muslims are being continuously vilified. I think there's a historical cultural piece there for sure, which is that Islam has always been the neighbor knocking on Western Christendom's door, number one. So this is not a new rivalry. There's a rivalry that's been there for centuries, and to top that rivalry off, it's become more clear to me that the Zionist lobbies, and I use Zionism very distinct from Judaism and Jewish because they're not the same, but Zionist lobbies have made it a real point.
The ADL would like to disagree.
I mean, they are pretty much Zionists in my eyes as well. But so the Zionist lobbies have made a huge point of linking Islam to violence and Muslims to terrorism again and again and again and again. So, and they do that to protect Israeli government policy to expand into the West Bank and Gaza and beyond even those borders, southern Syria, for instance. And so, yeah, you know what? We have to deal with it. We have to recognize that it's a very, very serious problem. It's an existential problem, in fact, because when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, I didn't have to deal with the perception or the accusation, albeit maybe in jest even, that I'm a terrorist. Our children have that. And yet, what I find incredibly disheartening is that the fundraising ability of Muslim communities in the West geared towards the next mosque, man, there's millions of dollars available. Millions.
Mm-hmm.
You start raising funds to tackle Islamophobia and hate against our children. Nobody's interested. We're not interested in giving a dollar. We're just not interested. Forget the other massive issues around gender discrimination that we have in our community, which is really quite serious. Forget the issues around underemployment. We are the lowest per capita earners in the UK, in Canada, in the US, out of any religious community. We're in a serious economic problem. But when it comes to tackling the hate against our children, we're not prepared to lift a dime. But, man, are we interested in building another mosque? I mean, I've been in a situation where...
Well, there isn't really any serious groups that are raising money for tackling Islamophobia. I mean, with mosques, what happens is you're building a structure so it's visible. They're like, ooh, look, now we built a beautiful mosque and we can go every day and visit and feel and touch and everything. And then there's a lot of money that also does get raised by charities for emergency appeals around the world. Could be Gaza, yes. Syria, some flood somewhere, some earthquake, and people will donate quite a bit for that because it's visual. People are suffering, they'll just donate. But Islamophobia, or tackling these kind of social issues, I don't think there's any serious kind of organization that's come out and really, that's asking for money and putting a real case out there. Maybe if there was something, people would be willing to donate, but it's also really hard to quantify what the suffering really is because you don't really have imagery, and I think imagery is really powerful. So when you see children being blown up in Gaza, you're very likely to donate some money for somehow to provide aid and shelter and food and medicine. But when you're talking about Islamophobia and kids are being picked on, and we see what's happening in the media, people are like it's just, there's no imagery, and the response is not quite there.
But you know what? I mean, I can't tell you how disappointed I am when I confront what you've just said, because it's our children. They're being hated. Like, I'm not messing. That's not a. I'm not exaggerating the word. Like, the degree of hatred for Muslims in the West is pretty damn serious. And for us to turn around and say, let's go build another mosque, let's put another 5 million into that. Well, to the point of, if there aren't organizations out there that are fighting this, then go build the organizations. And you won't be able to build organizations with peanuts. If you want impact, talent costs money. Talent does cost money. You've got to pay people top dollar to have impact. Top dollar means you've got to have money to do that. And so, I can't tell you how powerfully I want the Muslim community in Canada, in Toronto, in Ontario, to embrace the challenge of overcoming its addiction to bricks and mortar, when so much of our universe is now social media, the internet. We need to kind of wake up to, I have been in a conversation with a bunch of LSE alumni who got really annoyed with me because one of them turned up wanting to raise money for a mosque in an area where he wanted to raise a 7-figure sum for a mosque, okay? And within 20 minutes of that mosque site, there were 20 existing mosques. I said to him, dude, how on earth do you square this? You've got 20 mosques within a 20-minute commute of the site that you're talking about, and yet you still want to raise millions of pounds for another mosque. There's a mosque addiction. And you could say, yes, well, mosques are useful. But hang on a minute. Our existential crisis is that we are hated. We can't... If you really want to impact Gaza, if you really, really want to impact Gaza, don't mess around and say, I'm going to give to a donation to a charity that will send a few beds. Get real. If you want to impact Gaza, get hold of a lobby group. Get hold of a lobbyist organization in Ottawa. That's where you really impact Gaza. It's not by donating plasters and vaccines and blankets. Heck no. Absolutely not. If you really want to impact the situation in Gaza, impact the billions of dollars of aid that the federal government has, impact their policy of supplying weapons to Israel, impact their turning a blind eye to charities that fund Israeli soldiers, impact their willingness to go after Canadian citizens who've gone to fight in genocide and are coming back. That's what you want to impact. Mm-hmm. If you are actually serious about impacting Gaza, if all you want to do is make yourself feel good, well, yeah, you know what? I've got a few blankets. I'll give them to you as well. You can go and post them. Fat lot of good that will do. Absolutely no good whatsoever. These charities, these Muslim or non-Muslim charities are going around raising aid for Gaza, and our complicity with that is like, dude, we're great at putting the bloody plaster up, but when it comes to stopping the gun going off in our face, we're just not interested. We have got to think more strategically than where we're at right now. Right now, the Muslim community in Canada is beyond stupid in its prioritization of resources, in its prioritization of tasks. We've got hatred against our children. That's a big problem. Don't just turn a blind eye to it. Okay, fine. Hatred to our children may not be as serious as blowing up kids in Gaza. May not be. If you want to stop the kids being blown up in Gaza, very simple. Well, not very simple, but the thing that you should be doing is getting the federal government, getting your prime minister to go out there and use the word genocide in the context of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. He still hasn't done that. 1 year, 4 months on, with every multilateral legal organization on the planet basically saying it's genocide. It's pretty much clear. And we still, as the largest religious minority in this country, by a long shot, we can't get the prime minister to use the word genocide. So if you really want to help people in Gaza, get hold of lobby groups, absolutely go into the universe of influencing government. Don't spend a single dime sending money on blankets to Gaza. It's not going to make any difference.
I think the there's also, Trudeau government had appointed the special representative on Islamophobia, Amir Al-Gawabi. I'm not sure how much came out of that. A lot of people outside, let's say, the Islamic Canadian Muslim community just really hate her position's existence entirely. I'm not sure how much she's been able to affect change in the Trudeau government, really. And like you said, the use of the word genocide, and for us to be funding lobby groups in Ottawa, I think a lot of Muslims also just see the reality that we're just not able to compete with, the pro-Israeli lobby groups in Ottawa and especially in Washington. And we're just never going to win on that front.
Right.
And there's been what people have done and taken upon themselves as having massive protests that you can see across universities in the West, which, were quite impactful, in many ways. And they caused a lot of debate and, a lot of discussions to happen, just sitting in encampments in universities and public squares and things like that, and also just street protests across the Western world and other places in the world as well. And that has opened up discussion quite a bit. But beyond that, it's just people are not able to do much more beyond that, having an actual political solution.
But Nabil, we're the largest religious minority in this country. By a long way. We're not like marginally bigger than the next, but we are bigger than the next two put together. And for us to open up and kind of surrender and say, well, we're not able to compete, I'm sorry, but there's a reason for that, because we're so obsessed pumping money into mosques, and we're so obsessed in pumping money into plasters and band-aids. It's like, dudes, if you don't pump money into talent, which is going to go ahead and tackle the issues that have to be tackled, then you are dead in the water. In which case, there is literally no point sending blankets to Gaza if a single bullet, which costs peanuts, can cause the amount of damage that it can, and you're unwilling to tackle that. I mean, not that this is enough, but every single day since the genocide began, I have at least emailed one elected representative. Now, I'm not saying that's a huge thing, okay, but I'm not going to stop that until this situation is done, because that's way more, that actually adds something more. Now, there are other things that I'm involved in, I can't talk about those, to get that piece going, but you cannot possibly turn around to me and say that it is an acceptable position. The largest religious minority in this country surrenders and says, well, we can't possibly compete with them. No, I'm sorry. I've never fought a battle where I'm prepared to turn around and say, I cannot succeed. And so I would never, ever recommend that to anybody in our community. I would say fundamentally think long and hard about how is it that we are pumping money into bricks and mortar mosques again and again. And by the way, the vast majority are run by South Asian elderly men who have little or no impact track record. Okay, like not a particularly high talent bunch of people running, and they're all men, and they're all fundamentally South Asian. Okay, none of them really understand technology. None of them understand artificial intelligence. None of them understand, social media, which is really where an awful lot of things are taking place. But they are running the central institution of our communities. We've got a serious crisis here, and we are so unwilling, not only in Canada but also in the UK, so unwilling to deal with it. Like, if you object to somebody raising money for a mosque, half of the community will call you a kafir, like apostate, straight away, like you're in deep trouble. But like, dudes, we are a poor community. Mosques are expensive. It's not like buying a bloody Tim Hortons coffee.
I think the debate is also just more than just Canadian Muslims. Like, over the last 80 years, since formation of Israel and the end of World War II, people have always called for the two-state solution. The two-state solution is something that the Arab world consistently calls on even today, and many people call on a two-state solution, but it hasn't been able to budge whatsoever. And people will say that the Zionist cause, or really the Israeli lobby, and their desire to not have a two-state solution is so powerfully ingrained in, especially in the United States and most NATO countries, and it's just that needle is just not budging. So they just don't know what to do about it. And stopping the genocide or stopping the war. I mean, Gaza's fully destroyed pretty much. And then you might stop. You might have a ceasefire. A number of years goes by. they sort of rebuild, and they just go back to what it was, an open air prison camp, what people call it. But then nothing moves in terms of actual statehood for the Palestinians. So, how do you work towards that goal? Because most Muslims and most people believe who are against the war, what's happening in Gaza, that Palestinians should get statehood, and only then will the atrocities stop. How come is that?
So Palestinians since 1993, since the Oslo Accords, accepted Israel's right to exist. We have known at least that even Hamas was prepared at the latest by 2007 and possibly before that for that reality. We also know that Israel has never, I'm going to be very categoric, has never ever accepted a sovereign state for Palestinians.
Yes.
It's never. So as much of the crap that comes out from Zionists, okay, they cannot show a single date treaty example of Israel saying the Palestinians must have their own sovereign state. Okay?
Oh no, they don't say. They
Right.
want them either pushed in. They say Jordan is already a Palestinian state
Yes.
because it's mostly Palestinians, and the rest of them can be pushed out into Egypt and other neighboring countries, the Muslim world. We have this tiny sliver of land, and so why do you want a part of that as well? And
So-
that's what most of the American elite also believe in, and then no one else can do anything about it.
So we as Canadian Muslims can't do much about what the Americans do. Okay, but what we can do is what we can do in our country. We're the largest religious minority in this country by a long shot. We have votes. We control the votes in southern Ontario to an extraordinary extent because of our population. Not control. We have a say, should I say? Okay, so we have to realize that we're not small cheese. We are the big player here. Muslims in Canada are the big player in religious minorities, but we just I don't know what word to use, whether it's just plain stupid. I just don't understand why we can't shift and move our resource allocation. Like, I would want every single time, this is my plea, every single time you hear somebody raising money for a mosque, okay, I want you to go after that person and say, have you lost your mind? I really want that to happen. Have you really lost your mind that we need another mosque in this country?
So they'll be like, we need a safe space for our children, and we need to build mosques in the community, in our
Since
in
when
our
do kids hang out
communities.
in mosques? What proportion of Muslims,
Build Islamic schools?
what
and
proportion of Canadian Muslims, children, hang out in mosques? Get real. They don't want to do that. If I suggested to my 14-year-old, soon to be 14-year-old, go hang out in a mosque for this weekend, Papa, do I really have to? Papa, that's not fair. Papa, why do I have to go to them? Like, they're not
Not in
interested.
the prayer hall, but if you have a community
Anyway.
center with a gymnasium and with
They're not interested. You let them
all the different stuff.
You let them decide where they want. If they want to go to a gymnasium and play table tennis or whatever else, there are plenty of local municipal facilities available left, right, and center.
Why not at the mosque?
Because we don't have the money for it, and we've got a crisis. And not only are kids being hated, but we have a massive, more important crisis that we as a community can do diddly squat when genocide takes place against members of our own community in other parts of the world. That's why not a mosque. I'm not against the idea of renting out a prayer hall for when we need it.
Of course.
Okay, absolutely, go for it. Go to task. But the next time somebody comes up to you and says, we're raising money for another mosque, okay, please, for the love of God, turn around to that person and say, have you lost your mind? Have you actually lost your mind given what's happening in the world today? Have you, really, we have got to stop the hatred against our community. We have got to have a voice in the foreign policy of our country, which is way more powerful than the Zionist voice in our country. We have got to get to that point. We are massively greater in numbers. Our political system is not flooded with money like it is in the US. In the US, basically politicians are bought left, right, and center. $1 million here, $500,000 there. AIPAC and the other Israeli lobbies have made an absolute mockery of the American political system. And we don't have that problem here. You don't have to have $10 million in your bank account as a running, to run for Senate or to run for an MP's position over here. So we don't have that problem. So we can exert ourselves. Okay? We've got to change our focus so that we treat this place as home, because our kids are going to be brought up here. Home is no longer South Asia. So the conversation around, I'm going to go back home for the vacation. Well,
No.
back home, no. I'm sorry. If India and Pakistan is back home, then you go home now and stay there. you stay there, for God's sakes. Because we don't need people in this country, in our community, who can't invest in the long-term future of our community in this country. And number one to that is the social institutions. We have really got to make sure that our children aren't hated. It is not acceptable. It is not acceptable as parents, as uncles and aunts and grandparents, to bring up our kids in a country where half of the country doesn't like Muslims. Hates
So I think what happens is on a day-to-day basis, it's not blatant. So, it's in the media, it's happening in certain spaces, but if you're out and about in the city.
Yeah, but we can choose to be blind and deaf and dumb. We can be. Why not? Let's pretend that everybody likes us. Let's pretend that every second person that I drive by
indifferent at best.
Is indifferent at best. Let's pretend that. Okay, that's really cool. But the reality, statistical reality, is very straightforward. Mm-hmm. As is our, being completely mute, when it comes to influencing government. We don't influence government because we don't pay for talent to influence government, because we don't want to pay for talent, because we've got other priorities, which is mosque building. And we're a poor community anyway. So mosques are seven figures, $1 million, $5 million, $10 million at a time. About, we don't have the money to be able to go around to hire talent to get the job done in Ottawa. So what do? We just go around building mosques. Well, actually, even that's a bit wrong, because we don't even think about influencing the situation in Ottawa. We're just not interested. And it's like, but we're very happy sending blankets and plasters and tents to Gaza. It's like, no, don't. Do yourself a huge favor. Stop trying to save your soul, okay, and make yourself feel good by sending a bunch of bloody tents to Gaza. If you really cared about the people in Gaza, you would be on your case like a bad rash, getting that prime minister of ours to use the word genocide, getting him to block a bunch of Israeli weapons going out from this country. You'd be on his case, getting him to prosecute soldiers who have committed war crimes and who are coming back to Canada with Canadian passports.
What's the reality of that actually happening, no matter how much money you pumped into lobbying? Because Canada being part of the G7, and most of the G7 being a single club, our prime minister is not going to step out against the global system of governance that believes what Israel believes. And can we really expect any serious G7 country to come out and call it a genocide? I mean, the ICC came out and they even have an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Nothing changes. It's all just words. Will words really do have an impact in any sense?
I think the three countries where Muslims have the greatest opportunity to affect that: France, Canada, the UK, because we are the largest religious minority in each country by a long shot. Mm-hmm. But the culture that we have as a community, as a Muslim community, mosque build. Let's go build mosques. You got a major problem with being called terrorists. You got a major problem with your children being called terrorists. What do? You know what? I got a really bright idea. Let's go build a mosque. Let's go build another mosque. Like, dudes, what is it with this fetish in mosques? Like, dudes, we don't.
Because you run out of space during Ramadan and the Friday prayers, and you have to have like 3 Jummahs happening. So
trust me, if it meant $1 million of our capital as a community went into funding hatred against our children because we had to do 3 Jamaats during Ramadan, for the love of God, we can do that. We can't do that, Nabil.
So now, obviously, we kind of jumped into talking about, political engagement, but recently, obviously, there's an incoming Trump administration for the second time in the United States, and there's a lot at hand with them incoming just a couple of more weeks from now. And recently, Trudeau announced his resignation, and he's stepping down. A little bit early. He's already been prime minister for 9 years. Mm-hmm. So in a few months, we can expect some elections, and it's extremely likely that Pierre Poilievre will be the prime minister of Canada. It's almost a given at this point, and the Conservatives will come in with a supermajority. How do you see that changing things for Muslims and the Muslim community? Most of the Muslim community, especially South Asian, but I think most of the Muslim community across has always voted Liberal, just because the Liberal seems to have at least at the minimum, a softer language towards Muslims and a bit more willingness to engage in the discussion around Islamophobia. And also the pro-immigration policies have helped a lot of people to bring their families together. So for that reason, most Muslims continue to vote for liberals. Even today, they'll vote liberal. A lot of people will, on kind of the pro-Pierre Poilievre side, just want to save Canada in terms of the economic outlook, where Canada's headed, and Trudeau government hasn't helped that at all. So how do you see how we should be engaging in that? Where should we be putting our votes? How does that matter at this stage? Because now there's a big divide in terms of who do we vote for next.
So if Pierre becomes prime minister, he will add fuel to the genocide in Gaza, and for that, I would tell all those plaster sending, blanket raising Muslims in this country, you got what you deserved. Okay, because one single bomb that he sends is going to probably outweigh the vast bulk of your entire donation to Gaza. You got what you deserved. You had your head in the sand.
But most of those people would vote liberal, and they will probably still vote for liberal in the next election, no matter who the new liberal candidate is. So they're basically they're always going to vote liberal, but most of the Canadian population is going to go for Pierre, and that's why he's going to come in as prime minister. But sometimes I wonder if it's better for us to engage with the Conservative Party this time, especially now that we can basically expect that they're going to be, holding office. Can the Muslim community outreach to the Conservative Party, which traditionally it has not? So if we continue to completely disengage and alienate the Conservatives and only ever be with the Liberals have taken us for granted, and the Conservatives are basically like, these guys will never vote for us. So if they come into office and Pierre is prime minister and he has literally a non-existent voter base from the Muslim community, we will not have any voice at all in Ottawa. So isn't it better that we engage with Pierre Poilievre and his administration, give the votes maybe, and then have an expectation that, will work with us? Is that some strategy that could work?
Nabil, if we were organized, the Conservative Party wouldn't dare take us on. That's the bottom line. That is the bottom line. We are a significant minority in too many ridings in this country. We literally would control such a massive number of ridings that the Conservative Party wouldn't dare take us on if we were organized. Now, what does it mean to be organized? It means you've got to have money to organize. You've got to have money to hire talent. You've got to have money to set up institutions and what have you. If we were organized, we're just not organized, because we're just too busy doing the other stuff that I've already berated left, right, and center. And so what do we do now that we've got into this mess? We're in serious trouble. Like, we are now literally in very, very serious trouble. We're going to have an overtly Islamophobic government south of the border, which will further embolden Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. It's already been there for quite a while, as we know. Stephen Harper made sure of that. Okay. On top of that, that same Islamophobic government is going to facilitate and fuel genocide in Gaza. It's going to be somewhat more receptive to the Hindutva community as well.
But the Michigan Muslim community, and I think it was Dearborn, came out in support of Trump, and he even visited. And you probably saw that video. And they also asked, that the war in Gaza be stopped and Israel stop bombing Gaza. And Trump has promised that when he comes in, he will definitely stop that war. There was also a video of Khabib, who directly asked Donald Trump about stopping that war. And when Donald Trump was on Joe Rogan's podcast, I'm not sure if you saw a part of that. He brought that up, and Trump seems to have some sort of respect for Khabib, and he said, "I'm going to stop that war." Where do you see that going with the Trump administration? How are they going to stop it? Are they going to stop at least the bombing and the outright hostilities in Gaza? I'm not saying Gaza will go back to being rebuilt and a prosperous country. It's just been completely destroyed. It's going to take decades to rebuild. How do you see him stopping the atrocities?
It's really hard to empathize with Mr. Trump. He is mercurial. He is very spontaneous. Anything is possible. if you tell him that something can't be done, it wouldn't surprise me if he did everything he could to do it. So I don't really know where he's going to go. I know he's already appointed some people into worrying positions, or some worrying people into key positions, actually.
Yes, that's definitely true.
The future American ambassador to Israel is a criminal and a diehard Zionist, but he's also a convicted criminal, which is interesting. And so where Trump goes, I don't know. But I think he will end up inadvertently or consciously fueling Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. I think he'll legitimize it even further. I think the hatred against our kids will become stronger. I think the fueling of genocide in Gaza will become greater.
So you're saying he's going to go the opposite way? He's not going to be able to stop the atrocities in Gaza?
I don't think so. I don't think he is... because part of it is, to be honest, that he has too many Zionist influences around him, number one. Part of it is also that the control that that AIPAC and all have with other parts of the U.S. political process, particularly the House and the Senate, pretty serious. You know, the amount of money that they have used to bribe politicians to vote in their direction makes it a bit more challenging. So I don't really see... I don't see a sensible foreign policy from the Trump government, but I don't spend too much time about it because A, is unpredictable, and B, I'm not an American citizen. I can't really get involved in that. I mean, yes, I have an impact on some people in the US through social media, but it's not something, it's not my space.
So do you think, Gaza is gone and there's never going to be a two-state solution, and at this point, the West Bank will be next and it'll be annexed fully? And last time around with Trump and Trump administration, there was the entire push for the Abraham Accords and the normalization. So, they were able to sign on the UAE, which was quite a big win for them. And the next was supposed to be Saudi Arabia, but then Trump administration was, replaced by Biden. So that all got put on hold, and Saudi Arabia has held off until they get some of the things that they desire, I guess, politically. And there seems to be a willingness to engage in that again this time around with the Trump administration once they get some other objectives, and they'll normalize as well. So once a bunch of these countries have normalized with Israel, is that going to lead in a direction where, the Palestinian issue is somehow resolved in some way?
I think Israel has become the most hated country in the history of our species. And that's a problem that the Israelis have. It's not going to go away.
It seems that they don't care anymore.
They may not, but the impact on them can't be positive. They may not care while they've got the US trapped, but it can't be good for them. So it's become the most hated country in the history of our species. And I think Zionism is being exposed because Zionism isn't simply about let's have a Jewish state in Palestine. There has not been a major Zionist thinker in the 20th century who said, let's have a home for Jews in Palestine, and let's also make sure we don't kick out indigenous people from their homes.
Well, they don't believe they're indigenous, so then you have a huge problem.
Well, they can't... Okay, in 1914, only 10% of Palestine was Jewish. 90% was not Jewish. Okay, Jews had the right to live in Palestine continuously since 691, when Muslims took it over, except for during the Crusades, when the Roman Catholic Church decided to kick Jews out again. But Jews had the right to live from 691 until 1850s. They had no problems, Jews living in Palestine. We know that. The problems began when Zionism began. Zionism is actually a really serious problem for us all. And it's been a massive, massive, nauseous ideology that has pervaded the Palestinian people and has completely knocked them for six. So coming back to the question that you've asked, do I think the Palestinians will get their own state? I think it's going to be harder for the Israelis to prevent that from happening. Too many countries have now signed up for it. More than 124 in the UN believe Palestine must have its own sovereign state, including some of Israel's traditional allies like India. So it's become a huge thing, and it's not going away. It's a bit like Bitcoin, I suppose. Everybody's talking about it. It's not going away. So Palestine is not going away.
But it's kind of like with the U.S. with constant veto power in the UN Security Council, it's just they won't let that issue move ahead. Even if there's 120 countries that support Palestinian statehood or two-state solution, with the Americans completely against it, it's just that issue just can't move ahead. No one can go up against the United States and vote for that to actually happen and force Israel to accept a certain limitation on borders and create an area for a Palestinian state.
There's a cost for the isolation that the US and Israel will face as a continued result of ignoring Palestinian right to self-determination and Palestinian rights to live. There's a continued cost for that, and that I think will become more and more apparent over the next few years. I mean, let's face it, Americans are now more aware of the impact of supporting Israel, okay, than they have ever been aware of before. They are more aware of it. The younger generation in particular takes one look at what Israel does, takes one look at what the American government does for it, and says, why on earth are we involved in this? Why are we spending $28-30 billion of our tax money out to Israel per year when we've got more than 750,000 homeless people? It's not difficult to find this stuff on social media now.
Oh, it's not.
And so my hope is actually, number one, that the US and Israel will feel the pain and cost of isolation on this particular issue, but also number two, that within the American social political fabric, younger people in particular are going to push back and say, I'm sorry, but I ain't signing up for this $30 billion of our taxes going to a country that's effecting genocide. You know, and it's not just, by the way, non-Jews. I'm talking about very prominent Jewish people in the United States who have a voice are saying, this is not good. This is very, very bad. You know, and one of the transformative powers of the internet and social media is that this information isn't hidden. You've got people, the moment they announce it, it's shared to about 25,000 people in a flash, and another 25 million by the end of the week. So people, that awareness, you know, like Natalie Portman's perspectives, for instance, she's Jewish, yet she has come out very vociferously. I mean, she's an actor.
Well, they call them self-hating Jews now.
Right, they're called self-hating Jews, which is like fantastic. Like, you know what, let's just find a way to explain why people object to genocide because they hate their identity. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm sure the Nazis came out with equally vicious perspectives about Germans who didn't sign up to support the death camps that went up. So, you know, this is it. But I'm politely optimistic that it'll become harder and harder. And I think for the Democratic Party, as it goes into a bit of navel-gazing as to how on earth it let an absolute clown of a politician become the president for the second time, they're going to have to ask themselves some questions about Palestine, because it comes up again and again in their own research around, this is why younger people did not vote for you. You know, they looked...
Trump seems to be extremely popular.
Yeah. Because I think Trump's beauty, for what it's worth, is that he doesn't give a rat's ass about the way things have been done. And I think that unfortunately might be a healthy thing, because the way our democracies are run is an absolute sham. Like I want everybody to understand the way our democracy is run. We are forced to pay taxes at the point of gunpoint. If you don't pay your tax, you're off to prison. Okay, you could lose your home. Actually, the government doesn't even care if you have a home. You still got to pay your taxes. You have to pay your taxes. Okay, performance from the public sector is crap. They don't work. There's no performance. Like 9 to 5, plod culture, no time, no time sensitivity, no, you know, let's go flat out and make this work. Every major government project is over budget. It's delivered over budget and late. Okay, you can't get fired by the federal government in this country for poor performance. You just can't.
You just can't.
You can't. You know, if you're incompetent in your job, you won't get fired. You'll get moved around. Who pays for that? Taxpayers. Okay, and on top of that, we go around electing politicians for 4 or 5 years, and we cannot possibly understand what the heck they're doing. They can be lying out their bum and playing Nintendo games.
But that's what the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy promised to clean up in the United States government, is their Doge department, the Department of Government Efficiency that they've come out with, which is quite hilarious as a throwback to a meme coin. Just hilarious how things have shaped up in a serious political space. Where but maybe they'll actually make an effort of it. And what they've also said is that Doge has a set end date, and the goal is for it to dissolve itself by, I think it was May 2026, something like that. So they have about a year and a half to clean everything up and disappear.
I don't buy the strategy, okay, that Musk and all are talking about, but the end spirit or the end objective to wake up government, to properly ensure ownership of government by people, for want of a better term, democracy, people power, that spirit is something that we absolutely need in Canada. Like, this country is basically three groups that run this country: the unions, big corporate, and fat government, and that's it. And everybody else gets squeezed by the three. The reason we pay so much more for our goods and services is because of one of these three: it's the unions, it's big fat government, and it's the big fat giant corporates. Okay, and there needs to be a cleanup of our government in particular. We've got to ask ourselves, why is it so damn hard for us to fire at any tier of government bad talent? Why is that the case? Why are their pension plans the most generous on this planet? Like, literally on this planet, we have the most why is it the case, for instance, that we're talking about a healthcare crisis, but Ontario is the only polity in the world where physicians are paid by the public sector with 7 figures or more? Mm-hmm. Hang on a minute. We've got a healthcare crisis in Ontario, but we are the only province in the world where physicians are paid from the public taxes 7 figures at a time. It's like, dude, how? So we need to refresh and rethink government. And if you ask yourself, who protects us citizens from our government? Who's actually protecting us from government? Because don't tell me government is protecting us from government. And so the likes of Musk, yes, you know what? In this particular sense, I have an awful lot of time for the likes of Trump and Musk, who are saying, we have got to fix government. Like, it is a massive, painful bureaucracy of low performance and low impact, which is typically, not always, typically massively overpriced. Why is it that the most lucrative pensions in this country are all in the public sector? That's really weird.
That's right. But what's happening in Canada, and I'll get into a little bit about your business, background and entrepreneurship. But Canadians feel particularly poor, and increasingly so in comparison to the United States. I think there's a statistic as well where Canada's wealthiest province, going by GDP, is Ontario. But Ontarians' GDP per capita is lower than the lowest GDP per capita in the United States, which is Mississippi. So Mississippi has the lowest GDP per capita in the entire United States, and Ontario's is lower than that. So Canadians can't afford a home, in kind of the main centers where people mostly want to live, in Toronto and Vancouver, Ottawa, everywhere. So they make half as much money with homes that are twice as expensive. So they're overworked, underpaid, and they just can't move the needle. And in the United States, you do have a system where you'll have people like Elon Musk and other entrepreneurs that really make it big. But in Canada, it seems like you're punished for industriousness and you're punished for entrepreneurship. You're taxed to death, and there's increasing taxation with carbon taxes and all much higher income taxes in Canada. So basically, innovation is not really rewarded. So the talented Canadians just leave to the United States, and then we never get any personalities here that really make it big. So how can we escape that? And more to that is, how can Canadians, or what? How do we move into, pursue roles or pursue opportunities where we can have some kind of financial success, where we can build ourselves into a position where, like Musk and Vivek, now you have the power to change government?
So really, there are kind of 2 points. But the first that I'd make is that in Markham, for instance, you will have to pay about $250,000 in taxes and duties and fees to government to build a detached house. $250,000
for a single home.
For a single home, that's how much it costs by way of government taxes and duties and you name it, and permits. For $250,000, you can buy a 3-bedroom detached house in Texas. Okay, so you're absolutely right to flag taxes as being a huge problem in this country. The rat race in this country is extortionate. When I moved here in 2011, I made a decision. I said, I'm not going to be employed. There's no chance. Why? Employment taxes are ridiculous, and the commute times is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. You have a metro system which is unfit for a city of this size.
For sure.
Toronto is bigger than London. its metro is, I think, 20% of the size of London's. Okay, so by definition, if a population grows and it has to go to work in the morning, the commute from half an hour becomes 45 minutes, becomes an hour, and before you know it, you're spending 2.5.
Oh, if I have to go downtown, I spend 2 hours one way, door to door.
Right, there we go. So in that case, being employed in this country is a very, very bad idea, I think. I genuinely think if you're employed in this country, you are living an enslaved, a quasi-slaved existence. You are actually zombied. You are, you're actually neglecting life. I think you have an obligation. I think we have an obligation to respect the life that was given to us by God.
Yes.
Not to become zombies. Okay, and I think for most Canadians who are employed, particularly in this province, particularly because of so many other reasons, being employed is a surrender of life. And I would absolutely hate it if my kids ended up in that situation.
But it's very hard to escape for most people.
So coming back to the escape now. So there is no better investment. I mean, I've invested in real estate and bonds and derivatives and private equity. I've invested in the full gamut of investments. There is no better investment than taking your time, adding a little bit of your capital to it, creating a combustion, and watching the returns.
So what does that mean?
So that means applying a little bit of hard effort. Sorry, it means very specifically hard effort, energy, a lot of energy, a lot of backbone, a lot of resilience, some common sense, a series of micro pivots. You do something, doesn't quite work out, but you're onto something, so you change the direction. You do something else, and you've learned a bit more, and you pivot that business again. And to all of that, applying a small amount of capital, whether it's capital for the purposes of your branding, capital for the purposes of your legal advice, not your entire house, but you take an awful lot of energy and persistence and drive, and you apply some capital. The returns that I've seen in those situations...
To any business idea, is that what you're talking about?
Well, not to any, because a bad business idea is a bad business idea. But but what I will say, and this is really from my heart, especially to younger people in our community, I will say, you start off with your business, you do some research, some validation of it, and you recognize that you don't know it all. In which case, you don't put all of your eggs in that basket immediately. You start that journey, you do it for 3 to 6 months. You then figure out, actually, I didn't quite get it right. I've got to fine tune it. But I haven't put all of my eggs in that basket, so I haven't got much to lose by doing the fine tune. So, for instance, to keep it really simple, if you were going to do a bakery, okay, and the bakery was going to be about croissants, okay, what you don't do is get a state-of-the-art croissant machine, put it there, and then 6 months later figure out that the community around you doesn't want to touch croissants. You might rent the machine. Okay, so it's a much lower capital cost. You're just renting it. Or you might get a smaller machine. Okay, you put the croissants out and you figure out, no, it's not going to work. Okay, fine. Micro change here. Change it in this direction. The croissants aren't going to work. Maybe muffins is going to work. Maybe it's going to be biscuits. Whatever it is. So the point is that you don't put all of your eggs in one basket and you recognize that you are going to pivot. You're going to change. Because as you start your journey and you inject energy and time, you are going to learn. Okay, you're going to learn about what is working, what isn't working. And it's in the process of that, it's in the injection of the energy and the willingness to listen and kind of have some common sense that you eventually gain. You go up. No business, I mean, I've invested in so many businesses worldwide, I can't tell you, but no business that I've succeeded started with the business idea and followed it through. Absolutely not one that I can think of. And they've all done the same thing. Let's start something. And 6 months later, the CEO goes, you know what? We thought A, B, C, D. Actually, A and B we totally got wrong. C and D are correct. And we've learned E and F as well. And so now we're going to make some changes. Okay. And how do you do that journey is through energy. You've got to have the energy. And so hence my combustion advice. For the love of God and for the love of your own life, don't defer living until you're retired. Don't defer living until you're retired. Live today. Okay, that doesn't mean ignore the future. What it does mean is that you free yourself from this rat race. Like, it's an awful rat race to be in, particularly in this city, because the commute times, like you say, are just horrendous. And no tier of government is going to fix that problem. Like, absolutely out of the question. The government performance in Southern Ontario is inept.
Should Canadians that are, industrious and innovative and wanting to pursue entrepreneurial dreams, just leave Canada and try that somewhere else? I see people going to either the United States or even to the UAE these days. But at least there you don't have any taxation, so you have a head start in that sense. And then if you have remote jobs and things like that, you can kind of live anywhere, find a cheaper place to live, so you don't have expenses as much, and you can then dedicate more time to pursuing something. Because the most difficult thing is for most people would be to leave a 9-to-5 and then they just don't have any money. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck, have massive mortgages, like paying $5,000-$6,000 a month in mortgages, and they just cannot take their time to work on a business idea. So how do they do this? How do they start moving ahead?
So I'm very passionate about this, and I've started something called the ratracerevolution.com. I started that with a view to assisting precisely that group of people. One of the messages that has come consistently from my conversations with other entrepreneurs who've succeeded, okay, and it's fascinating because I actually believe it myself, is that money, or raising the money for the business, is the easiest part of this journey. Okay, the hardest part, raising the capital for your business, is the easiest part. The hardest part is actually in believing that if you put real energy behind what you start off with, okay, that something positive can come out of it. That's the hardest part. It's such a stupid thing for me to say. I feel so dumb saying it. Like, the hardest part of it is just accepting that if you put real energy and real effort for a few weeks and months behind whatever you start, okay, that it will get you somewhere. You won't get to where you think you're going to get to, but you will absolutely get somewhere. And from that somewhere position, you will be looking back and saying, yeah, you know what? I have more confidence now about where we're going and how to make this work. Okay. The money part is very easy. You've got to keep in mind that there is more money out in this city. There's walls of money which are desperate to earn a return. Okay. And there's an entire conversation about how you attract that capital and what you have to do and what you have to present. And that's part of the work that I'm doing on the Rat Race Revolution, is around that, is around simplifying that and making people understand how that money raising, how the capital raising piece happens. But the hardest part is saying, look, I've had this business idea, number one. I've done a little bit of research around it, done some fact checking, talked to a few people, got some real information as opposed to Google. So I've got a bit of a sense. Okay, the hardest part is transitioning from that to, I'm now going to give it some serious energy, because you're going out on a limb here. You're making a leap of faith and saying, I don't really know where the heck this is going to go. Is it worth my time? Okay, you might not put a lot of money behind that, but is it actually worth my flipping time? Okay, do I really want to spend time on this? And that's the hardest part. It's like, yes, it is. It's like, just trust it. Just trust. If you put some serious effort and some energy and a little bit of common sense, okay, it's worth it. I do not know of an exception to that rule. I know dozens of entrepreneurs in dozens of countries. I do not know of a situation where an entrepreneur put his serious effort, serious energy, okay, and a little bit of capital, and then got to the point of looking back and saying, yeah, you know what? I'm on top of this now. Now, that doesn't mean that you will eventually succeed. Like, you won't be a billionaire by virtue of that. But you will have gotten to a point where you can actually take it to the next level. Okay.
You've built some confidence and experience. Is that what you mean? Or
in that particular thing. And you've learned. So it's no longer, I don't know. It's like, I kind of know vaguely now. Okay. So many of the businesses I've been involved in myself, you have a certain idea in mind. You start it for 3 months. You do a sense check and you realize, hey, now I know a whole lot more. Now I know how this can really work. Okay. I had a 50% idea on day one, but because I put some real energy in it, I've got now an 80% idea of how this is going to work. Then you put 3 months more energy, you've got an 88% idea. Okay. How it's going to work, of how it can work, what needs to change. Okay. But the hardest part of that is the commitment from your inner self and say, I'm going to give this a real hard crack for 30, 60, 90 days. Well, not 30, but more than 30, but 3-4 months. Okay. And it's hard because you're going out on a limb. You're having to make a leap of faith. It's not about having to leave your job or selling your house and putting the entire house proceeds in. No, it's not. It's the time. The hard part is, I'm going to commit 90 days or 6 months or whatever it is into this leap of faith, not knowing where the heck I'm going to. And the people who eventually make that decision are people a bit like me who are like, you know what, I'll make the leap of faith. I don't really know where it's going to go. I'm going to make sure that it's not a disaster, because if I ever feel it became a disaster, I'll pull straight out. But I'm going to give it a real hard crap for 90, 60, or whatever number of days, and then reevaluate. And every time I've done that, in any space, including spaces that most spaces I'm ignorant about, but every single time it's been the same end result. It's been the effort got me to a point of saying, yeah, you know what? Now I know how this works. And the rat race revolution as well, .com, that didn't start with, we know what we're going to do. No, we started in one direction. We pivoted. We made some changes because we realized, actually, this isn't going to work. And then we made some more changes. And we got to the point of being 50% certain, 60%, 70%. And now I wouldn't say we're 100% certain, but we have a much tighter idea. And yet, how much money have we spent in the rat race revolution? Not a huge amount. It's not, but it's cost me time. Have I learned an awful lot about that? Business, for sure. Okay, and that's true of everything. Same thing with real estate. Same thing with retail. Okay, so my advice. I mean, I have a 19-year-old son, second year university, and so I can, I often look at him as a proxy for when I give people advice. My advice to younger people in particular is combine your energy, your talent, your energy more than anything else, talent, resilience, persistence, and sacrifice a certain amount of time to go after something hell for leather, and do some research, some proper access to information, some financial model, some calculations, some introspection, some learning before that journey begins, and then you get to a point where you say, yeah, you know what, I've learned an awful lot. Now I know how to make this thing succeed. But the hardest part is having that leap of faith. And that's such a stupid thing for a person with a PhD to talk about, because you're always thinking about academic rigor and intellect and,
having it all figured out before you get started.
Right. No, this is a leap of faith. This is a leap of faith. But the leap of faith nearly always pays off if you don't throw the kitchen sink into your venture and you give it everything you have for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Because in that in starting that journey, you learn. You think. You start from a position of A1, and you end up at a higher position in that genre that you're focusing on. So if you start off thinking the croissants are going to work, 6 months down the line, I promise you, it won't be croissants that are working for you. I promise you, in 6 months, it'll be a baked product. I can't tell you what it is. It could be Pakistani baked products. Okay, it could be Chinese. It might not be French. It might be savory. It might not even be sweet. Okay, but you start up as a croissant business, and I can absolutely promise you it will succeed if you put 6 months effort into it, and it won't be croissant business.
So, I don't know how you're doing for time.
Very good.
Okay, so one of the things that a lot of people look at is before even starting on entrepreneurship is how many of those pivots. Step one, obviously, like you said, take that step on, leap of faith, spend that 90 days, 3-4 months in validating an idea, and don't overinvest in it. See how it, and then keep pivoting until you find the thing that works. But how many years is that going to? How many pivots are we looking at? 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 pivots. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years down the line, and to keep going at it without any financial reward for that long, for most people, it's just too difficult.
Okay, so firstly, the validation begins before you start putting energy in. Like, I'm thinking of starting a business. I've already rung up a bunch of people who are potential customers, and I said to them, if I did this, tell me how you feel. So I'm already getting feedback, okay? So even before putting any time and energy in. But when it comes to, it will take some time to get to that point, like 3 months, how many pivots do you need? Could it be a year? You need to have enough personal operating runway to support you for some time. That's step one. So if you've got nothing in the bank account, try and get something in the bank account before you start the journey, okay? You don't have to leave your job. You can do it part-time. There's a reason why so many businesses have started off in a garage. Okay, so you can start on that basis. And the second thing is that you can come to a point in 6 months or 3 months, where having done a bunch of things and having learned a bunch of things and having put some real energy, you can then say to yourself, I now know what this business is about. I now know where the revenue is coming from. I now know what the costs are going to be. I'm going to put a business plan together. Okay, and I'm going to make sure it's really robust. And the ratracerevolution.com, we talk about that as well, how you put that together, what investors are looking for. And you go to investors and say, I'm going to give this 6 months or a whole year of my life. I'm going to put a little bit. I'm going to put some of my cash in as well, or I've already put some cash in myself, and I now want you to think about investing. That's why I think raising money for your businesses isn't as hard as people think it is. For most people starting a business for the first time, the getting the money is, whoa, the massive thing. Like if only I had the money. And I'm thinking to myself, dudes, wake up. Money is the easy part. I have not yet met an entrepreneur who succeeded, who turned around to me and said, yeah, you know what? The initial money was quite difficult. Because even if they don't have money themselves, typically they have a business idea which has had some track record, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, okay, and real commitment to that. And investors look at that and say, yeah, you know what? If this guy's committed, I'm committed. So the number one thing I look for when I invest in a business, more than anything else, is evidence of commitment. I'm not saying it's easy to get that evidence, but I'm not particularly interested in the business as such. Yeah, I am slightly, but I'm much more interested in evidence. So I've invested, for instance, in a fish farm. I've invested in a business which tests water for fish farms.
Interesting.
I'm ignorant about most things, and I'm so ignorant about that it's embarrassing. Okay, I don't know the first thing about water testing. I have no background in chemistry. I don't know the first thing about fish farming, but I took one look at the commitment that I could see from the founder of that business. Said, I don't really know this business that well. I can kind of see it, but I can see this guy's committed. I know he's committed. I can see in his fingertips. He's put some of his money in. He is absolutely a nutcase on this business. Okay, so when you start your business and in 3 or 6 months you've already got that commitment and you're doing it flat out and you actually believe in what you're doing, trust me, investors are going to want a piece of your equity. They will invest. Mm-hmm. You know, and I'm saying this. I'm 50 plus years old. I've been through this cycle many times. I want our younger generation in particular to realize, to trust me. Just trust what I'm saying here, that when you put the energy and the time and the effort with a little bit of your capital, okay, the hardest part is just making that leap of faith. And if you can make that leap of faith, heck man, like things open up in a way which is very hard even to intellectually explain, but you just end up learning and making these micro changes on an ongoing basis. And if you need capital, then
how do you balance that with shiny object syndrome?
Shiny object syndrome. Okay, that's a new one, Nabil. What is a shiny object syndrome?
As you work on a certain idea, you're like, wait, that looks like it could work better. You switch to that. And then you're working on that, and you're like, oh, that might work better. You switch to that. So you're pivoting prematurely. But and then now you're just chasing and never quite committing to anything.
Yeah. No.
This hasn't quite yet worked. I've already been doing this for 3 months, 4 months, but that might be working. That might work. I switch to that, and I spend another 4 months. But like that doesn't quite work. That looks shinier. So that's the shiny object syndrome.
Yeah. No. So I think common sense. I think common sense would, you got to have some common sense there. What I will say is that anybody starting their journey, for the love of God, get at least 2, 3, 4 people who you can talk to about what you're doing. For, let's say, every month you say to somebody, I'm going to spend half an hour with you.
Mentors?
Mentors. Yeah. I'm going to spend half an hour with you, uncle, or half an hour with you, elder brother, or half an hour with you, former employer, manager. Okay. I'm going to give you 10 minutes about what I'm doing. I'm going to give you 10 minutes about what I'm going to be doing. And I want you to just blast me for 10 minutes about what's wrong and what do I need to look for. You do that every month with 3 or 4 people. Trust me, it'll be hard to make big, fat, wrong decisions. Yes, the small decisions you could get wrong. It's very hard to make big, fat, wrong decisions when you got to explain what you're doing every month just for half an hour. You buy them the coffee. You don't even hold back as to what kind of coffee they can buy. If they want all the cream, you give them all the cream, okay? But you sit there for half an hour. 10 minutes, this is what I have been doing. 10 minutes about, this is what I'm going to be doing going forward. This is why I think it's the right thing to do. And 10 minutes about, okay, now you tell me what's going wrong or what you think I could be doing better. Or even better still, can you introduce me to somebody who can point in the right direction? In the right direction, the ratracerevolution.com is heavily geared towards making sure that we figured out what we can do to help people free themselves from this 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. culture where you come home completely exhausted. So your entire week is gone. That gives you 2 days off for yourself. 1 day is full of chores, clean up, chores, you name it. 1 day is for yourself, for your spouse or your partner, for your kids, for your friends, for your cousins, for your grandparents, for your siblings, that's just one day. That's not living. That is not living. We were not given the gift of life so that we could grind ourselves for 5 days.
But doesn't an entrepreneur work even harder and longer?
Oh, man.
60, 80, 100 hours.
So
there's a whole, what do you call it, hustle culture in terms of entrepreneurship, especially in Canada, United States. You look at Elon Musk, and he slept in the factory and worked 100-hour weeks to get Tesla off the ground, and people just idolize that.
So, look, entrepreneurs typically have to work harder for 1, 2, 3 years. Number one, okay. Number two, they enjoy their work a lot more because they have a lot more control. They have a lot more control over their hours. Okay, they don't have to get out of. They don't have to worry about Sunday evenings. Mm-hmm. Sunday evenings is not a worry. Okay, they get out of bed, they figure out what they want to do. Okay, and as an entrepreneur, you can choose to delegate. Once your ship is stable, you can choose to delegate. You can have a manager in charge of your project. Okay, and you can do whatever you want with your spare time. Okay, but my point is that we must respect life. I might not be here next week. There's a serious possibility of that. Well, okay, there's a possibility of that. Okay, I might not be here next year. I've had friends, I'm sure you have had friends who passed away in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s. Okay, I know some people who passed away in infancy. I know of some people. But so we don't know how long we're going to live for. And to make the assumption that we're going to be around till we're 75 and therefore we're going to start living at that point and do the things that we want to do with our life is insane. Your knees can't support you properly at that point. So what the heck are you doing worrying about, deferring life for 20 years? And as part of that message, I also am adamant that you don't have to sacrifice the quality of your life. Actually, the quality of your life can improve significantly if you turn around and try and escape from the rat race. And I would never want my children to be in the rat race for more than 3 or 4 years, and only for that period so that they know what it's like. They can experience life from the perspective of everybody else around them, and they can say, yeah, you know what, Papa, I ain't doing this. Because if any of my kids was like employed into their 30s, I'd be horrified. I'd be absolutely horrified if any of my children turned around to me at age 35, Papa, I'm still employed. Because like, dude, what about your life? What about living? What about reading the things that you want to read? What about cooking the stuff that you want to cook? What about exercise? What about meditation? What about hanging out with your friend, for 3 hours on a Wednesday afternoon because you want to, without having to worry about your manager chasing you up and down and trying to figure out what you're doing, what you're not doing?
There's a little bit of that there's been a lot of flexibility granted ever since COVID. If one positive thing came out of that is a lot of people can work remotely. So it does save you from the commute, and you just sign in, you get up, and a lot of companies, especially in the tech world, they have flexible working hours, you can say.
Yes.
Start 10, 10:30, 11 sometimes, and you work, and you have some flexibility as long as you're completing your tasks. So you kind of feel the same, I guess, freedom as an entrepreneur, but not quite the same thing, obviously, financially, of course not, but there is a lot more flexibility that's been granted.
There's physical flexibility,
yes,
but certainly not cognitive, emotional, psychological.
Of course not.
You are still told to get this done for somebody else, and you have no idea whether it's value adding or not. You can't hold meaning to your work in quite the same way as if it's your work.
Of course not.
And that's massive. There is a real joy to be had in doing work that you decide that you want to do, and that has meaning for you.
Of course.
It's a massive joy. And the and the kind of post-industrialized way of working, which is that you're basically, putting on a screw cap of a toothpaste, and everybody else has done everything else before you, is not particularly fun.
Of course not.
But the other thing really is that being employed, employment taxes here are just ridiculous. And as entrepreneurs, you do have some flexibility in the way you manage your income streams, and that's a big plus. You are not. You have some flexibility in how you go about managing your tax affairs. Legally, it's perfectly legal, and you can use that for your advantage. Whereas if you're employed, you're dead and buried. Half of what you're earning, at least, goes to tax, because you're not just paying income tax, you're paying sales tax on your bread. On most of your food, you're paying sales tax. You're paying sales tax on your car fuel. You're paying, the cost of commuting to and from work is post-tax dollars as well. So if you are employed, you are actually employed by the government. Like half of your income goes to government. And by the way, keep in mind that the government is totally unaccountable to you. Like there's no accountability mechanism in place for that for the half of your income. Now, you might think that's okay. Let me give half of my income at gunpoint to somebody else who can and do whatever they want with it, and I've got no bloody say. That might be fine for you. I think it's a bit morally unacceptable. Okay? I would turn around to people who want my money, who want half of my money. I'd say, show me the results. Show me the results, But the government isn't trained for that. So I'm like, okay, dudes, I'm not going to be employed, because it's like, who the heck wants to be paying half of their income to a black hole universe where you've got no idea what's going on, and on top of it, there's no accountability, and on top of it, you have a gut sense that there's no performance culture either. You cannot be fired from the federal government, which is very disturbing, because if you think about it, it's like, why am I working my ass off to pay for somebody who's inept?
That's insane. So before we wrap it, I want to kind of talk about a little bit of how your entrepreneurial journey was, and what did you work on? I know you've done a lot in real estate as well, and a lot of other things, but maybe if you can a little bit go over that and just describe.
So I migrated 2011 to Toronto from Dubai, and I made up my mind that I was not going to be subject to commute times in this city, and I was not going to be paying ridiculous taxes. So that was the starting point, which meant I had to be an entrepreneur, which meant that
why did you leave Dubai? That seems to be the business capital in a way. A lot of people go there. There's less taxation, all of that. And why Canada from Dubai?
So, like much of the Gulf, the human discriminations in Dubai were things that I didn't want my children to be exposed to.
I see.
I didn't want them to see other people as Filipino or female or big fat industrialist or whatever else. I wanted them to grow up in a fairly egalitarian culture, where they saw the human identity first, and if anything else beyond that, so be it. Okay, and I think the Gulf is not a great place for that upbringing. So it's really for the kids, and also there's a second adjacent piece, which is that that their grandparents were aging, and the relationship between grandparents and grandkids is not to be missed out on. There's a massive plus there, and my kids have benefited very much from that relationship. And so my parents were in London. My father passed away 7 years ago. But my children's grandparents from the mother's side are here in Toronto, and they benefited from that proximity. So that was the real kind of crux of it. So moved here, didn't want to be employed, said let's be an entrepreneur, and I settled on real estate development, particularly student housing. And I've been doing that successfully for 8-9 years now. And I branched out into investing into early stage businesses as well, worldwide, not just real estate. And I've also done a bunch of projects now which have no debt to them at all. So there's no interest in the construction, there's no interest in the renovation, there's no interest payments at all. And that's really been for the Muslim community, because I know the Muslim community is very sensitive to usury and riba. And so we did a bunch of projects, and I'm doing a bunch of projects, in fact, which have no debt to them. In real estate, and so now with all that done, we started something called the ratracerevolution.com, and the game plan for that is really to help people free themselves up and for them to recognize the gift that life is, because it's just drowned out of us. Like, we have become so used to accepting a zombie existence that we just don't live. Like, it's really disappointing. And particularly in Toronto, I think, because of the commute times, and also because the nature of our food is so plasticky here. There's a drive for the cheapest because taxes are highest, because, for a bunch of reasons that we end up having to compromise on our food in the city as well. And my realizing that part of that is because we don't have time. And so we're continuously buying food from outside. I now make it a point to make my spices at home. I don't even use flipping garam masala from the packet. Like, I'll literally make it from home. I'll make all my curries from home. I'm not interested in buying packeted food, and I'm not inclined to buying restaurant food, which is typically the cheapest quality materials, even if they're well presented sometimes. So the Rat Race Revolution is now the next kind of big mission, and the game plan, the kind of focus there is to help free people from the rat race by showing them a path to entrepreneurial activity, to inspiring them, giving them comfort, giving them the tools, motivating them, giving them an ecosystem in which it's really, I wouldn't say it doesn't get it. I can't say it would guarantee success, but for anybody who is committed to the energy and the resilience, then it's really hard to not do well as an entrepreneur. That's really the essence of what the rat race revolution is about, I think.
I think I saw is it like a business mastermind? It's like a school community, I think, that I saw online, or is it more than that? Or did it launch already? Or
we have launched. There is a school community, but there's also a series of interviews that we have with people who've escaped the rat race. There's a community that we're forming to encourage, for want of a better expression, group therapy amongst entrepreneurs, people who have started their journey or are about to, and kind of need either advice or support or emotional backup, because it's a daunting journey. It's no doubt about it. And what's interesting for me is that I look at that journey and I think actually it shouldn't be daunting, but I totally understand why it is. And the reason I don't think it should be daunting is because fundamentally it boils down to that leap of faith. It boils down to, I'm going to put energy with a bit of capital and I'm going to give it 3-6 months. And like I say, I've just not seen failures as a result of that. And so I don't think it should be daunting, but I totally get why it is. And so we're creating something really for people to reclaim life, and I wouldn't say entrepreneurialism is the only thing which underlies the rat race revolution, because there is a problem that we have in society with our addictive consumer culture. We are bombarded with messages to buy, okay, in a way that as a species we have never ever confronted, continuously. And buying means you have to earn post-tax dollars, okay, and you end up buying these collectibles or the limited editions which sit there in the back of your garage box because you don't really need them. And disconnecting our behavioral pattern from that consumer culture is part of escaping the rat race revolution. It's like, buy what you need, but just don't get caught into this trap of buying non-stop, because every third thing that you see on social media is a sales piece geared towards specifically you. Like, these marketing people are wizards and they've got you by the short and curlies, and you don't.
I've worked in
so this.
I'm from engineering background, but I have done a bit of like e-commerce, and the way the tools that are available to using AI to target and retarget people is incredible.
It's not nice.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's a powerful tool. Yeah. Every business does it, but
so just making people aware and alert of that, and also the impact that the rat race has on our health, our heart systems, our vulnerability to cancer. It's just shocking. And so I think the rat race revolution piece is a huge piece around entrepreneurship. I think it's gravitated around that, but there are other pieces as well, just educating people in terms of what this universe is about, what the rat race is about, and how compromising it is, and shining a light to a very, very real alternative. And we've got a wonderful range of entrepreneurs who've succeeded, some of whom are, managing billions of dollars, who have either already come on to our program to share their experiences, or will be in the next few weeks and months. So I'm genuinely excited by that.
How can people join?
Well, go to the website, Rat Race Revolution, or look me up on LinkedIn, and the connections are there as well. Yep.
Awesome. It's been awesome speaking with you.
Thank you, Nabil. I hope I didn't bore the life out of you.
No.
I'm very good at that,
I think we should have a part 2. There's so much to discuss. I had a whole plan and questions that I set up, but our conversation kind of weaved in and out of some of those points and into some new points. And but it's an awesome discussion.
You're not asleep yet, though.
I'm not.
You're not sleeping. You'll have to work harder.
I love having interesting conversations, so this is why I do this. But I'd love to have a part 2 as well, and discuss more things. And I'm definitely interested in seeing where the rat race revolution goes. I think from a lot of Muslims, they are looking for something to escape for entrepreneurship. I read a statistic where 80% of all millionaires made it in real estate. So that leaves only 20% for the rest of all the rest of business ideas. Is that true in your experience, or should just people go into real estate, or is it is it AI the next big thing that people should be going into, especially if you're a tech background, or is there something else? What in terms of waves of activity in in the economy?
Look, Southern Ontario, real estate prices are still fluttering very near their all-time highs.
Yes.
So you buy low, sell high. Okay, so real estate is it a smart thing to enter real estate in this economy? Generally, I'd say no. There could be specific niches, yes, and specific opportunities, but developing residential real estate doesn't strike me as the slam dunk that it was 10 years ago. But irrespective, I'm of the view that if you combine energy with a bit of capital, if you combine serious energy with a bit of capital, you'll make it. Like
in anything.
Huh?
In kind of anything.
In kind of anything. Like I have a 19-year-old son. He graduates in 2 years. I'd like him to work 2-3 years and be part of the rat race to experience what this mess is about. But in his mid-20s, I can imagine him coming to me and think, Baba, I've got this idea. I've done some research, talked to some people. I want to make it happen. I've got some money set aside. What do you think? And I would say to him, as long as you give it hell for leather, you'll make it work. As advice that my brother took, and he did remarkably well out of it, is advice that I took, I did well. And I really don't know of anybody who's done that and not done well. I just don't know. And you can call me ignorant and stupid, like most people, like most of my friends do. But I'm just not aware of people who've put some serious effort into something, into a sensible thing. I will say that whatever they started, they changed. Mm-hmm. They did change, every single one. But
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
What you get started with, the initial idea is not going to be what you'll
absolutely not. I can put
strike
money on
gold
that.
with.
Yeah, your almond croissant business is going to end up being a paratha business, or it could be a muffin business. But it will broadly be in that space.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to touch about one thing. You said you invest in a lot of businesses or startups around the world. So what kind of startups are you investing in? What do you look at? Like, is it kind of in tech space, or is it anything?
It is anything. I need, and more than anything, like I mentioned before, I'm looking for evidence of serious commitment from the people who are doing it. Like, there's nothing that beats skin in the game. There's nothing that beats a demonstration of commitment. And it's been in multiple countries, multiple sectors. I've had, I would say, a 15% failure rate and a 15% knockout rate, and the rest are done reasonably well. And I think it does work. Part of my investment education came when I was at McKinsey, and they used to, and they still advise private equity firms on how to go about investing. Mm-hmm. And they would have this, you focus on a sector, and you focus on a geography, and then you focus on a stage of investing, and you focus on a size of investment. And I realized that at my level, at least, which is the kind of piddly level, that doesn't stack up. What does stack up is, show me your skin in the game. Show me that you are absolutely drinking this business inside and out to make it happen. And show me that if this business fails, you are in trouble. Because if you can show me that, then heck, you know what? I have got to be interested.
It's not a hobby. It's your life is on the line, in a sense, as a founder.
Yeah, I've seen it again and again. I have seen it again and again, people who are in that situation come out because they go through the pivots. They throw the energy in. They're absolutely throwing energy, and they're continuously making these pivots because they say, I thought I was going to sell 10 units to this kind of person. He's not buying any. But the other person who I didn't think I was going to sell to, he wants to buy 1,000 of these. Holy smokes. But you don't know that until you give it some serious flipping energy. That's right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and insight and sharing everything.
You're very welcome, Nabil sir.
Any concluding thoughts or anything like that?
No, just don't eat peanut butter with palm oil.
Yes. I only get 100% peanut butter or almond butter.
Yes.
I think that's a whole different topic we could talk about, but I think health and fitness and eating right is very important. I think a lot of people, 99% of people have zero idea about putting the right things in their body.
Oh, yes.
So over the last many years, I've made that change as well in my own immediate family, but also my parents and siblings who have eventually cleaned out their cabinets with a lot of junk foods, the Nutellas and the canola oils and
Oh, yeah.
a lot of the other stuff. But I think
And don't
that's-
cook with plastic utensils either. That's a very, very bad
no
idea.
plastic utensils, no Teflon coating, stainless or
Yeah.
non-stick stuff.
Oh,
So-
Nabil, I love you. Where
Well,
have you been?
I can go on. This topic could be another couple of hours of discussion, but yeah, I think that's really important. Actually, I think that's super important. I think people's health and their mental health and physical health is highly impacted by the types of things they put in their body. If you're constantly eating fried chicken from wherever it is, Popeyes or crispy halal chicken or whatever, you're poisoning yourself slowly, and excessive amount of sugar and eating the wrong things all the time. I think this is going to kill you. But that's very important. That's definitely. It's great to know that you're also really interested in that kind of field.
Yeah, no, it does feed into our Bright Race Revolution piece, because we flag it as, look, if you want to live your life, you want a healthy life, okay? And you won't get that healthy life if your body is being polluted and you're not exercising. I exercise at least an hour a day, at least.
That's right. Yep.
I would recommend it for everybody, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nabil. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.